Welcome to the world of daily life stories. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss new stories. Enjoy listening. The Arrival and Subtle Judgments. Jasmine Carter was no stranger to airports. As a successful entrepreneur and public speaker, her life often consisted of flights, meetings, and high-stakes negotiations. On this particular day, she was en route to a major business summit, one where her presentation could seal a multi-million-dollar deal. Walking into the luxurious airport lounge, she expected comfort and professionalism. Instead, what awaited her was a subtle, sharp-edged reminder of the prejudices she had fought against her entire life. The lounge was a pristine space, with polished marble floors that reflected the warm overhead lights. Comfortable leather chairs were arranged strategically, offering both privacy and sophistication. There was a faint hum of conversation, the clinking of fine glassware, and the occasional rustling of newspapers. It was the epitome of exclusivity, where the elite came to relax before their flights. Jasmine entered confidently, her tailored navy suit emphasizing her commanding presence. She carried a sleek leather briefcase that complemented her polished appearance. As she stepped further into the lounge, her heels clicked against the marble floor with an authoritative rhythm. Heads turned, and eyes followed her, not with admiration, but with skepticism. She felt the weight of their gazes, the quick glances that seemed to ask, "Does she belong here?" The young receptionist at the desk noticed her approach. His uniform was crisp, his demeanor professional, but his hesitation was impossible to miss. As Jasmine handed over her boarding pass and membership card, his polite smile faltered, replaced by a furrowed brow. "Good afternoon, ma'am," he said, his tone carefully measured. "May I have a moment to verify your information?" Jasmine gave a gracious nod, though she was accustomed to these moments of scrutiny. "Of course," she replied evenly, her voice carrying the calm of someone used to proving herself in spaces that weren't always welcoming. The receptionist disappeared behind the counter, and Jasmine was left standing alone. The whispers began almost immediately. She could feel the eyes on her, the quiet judgment, the unspoken questions. Why is she here? Does she really belong? Her posture remained poised, her head held high, but the air around her felt heavier with each passing second. When the receptionist returned, he wasn't alone. A woman in a striking red blazer accompanied him, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. Her name tag read Heather. With her neatly styled blonde hair and a sharp expression, Heather exuded authority. The kind of authority that didn't just follow rules, it enjoyed enforcing them. "Miss Carter," Heather began, holding Jasmine's membership card delicately between her manicured fingers as if it were a dubious artifact. "This is a priority lounge. Are you aware of that?" Jasmine met Heather's gaze steadily. "I am. I've been a priority member for over 5 years, she replied, her tone polite but firm. Heather's lips curved into a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. She glanced at the card, then back at Jasmine, her expression shifting from professional to subtly patronizing. "We've had some issues recently with unauthorized use of these cards," she said, her words dripping with insinuation. Jasmine felt the weight of Heather's words, the unspoken accusation beneath them. Still, she refused to rise to the bait. "If you'd like to verify my credentials, feel free," she said, maintaining her composure. Heather gave a small, condescending nod and walked away, leaving Jasmine to endure the stares of the lounge's other patrons. A couple seated nearby exchanged whispers, their eyes darting toward her before quickly looking away. Jasmine straightened her shoulders, her resolve hardening. She had worked too hard and accomplished too much to let subtle biases and unwarranted judgments shake her. Minutes passed, each one stretching longer than the last. Finally, Heather returned, her expression carefully neutral but with a hint of smug satisfaction. She handed the card back to Jasmine. "Everything checks out," Heather said, her tone implying that she had expected otherwise. "However, I must remind you that our priority lounge has certain standards of decorum. We expect all members to uphold the exclusivity and refinement of this space." Jasmine's jaw tightened slightly, though her smile remained intact. "And what exactly does that entail?" she asked, her voice carrying a calm but unmistakable edge. Heather's smile widened, her condescension barely concealed. "Let's just say we expect our guests to reflect the standards of this lounge," she said. The implication was clear, and it hung heavily in the air between them. Jasmine took a slow breath, steadying herself. She had encountered such moments before, moments where her presence was questioned, her worth subtly diminished. But what Heather didn't realize was that Jasmine Carter wasn't someone who quietly accepted disrespect. She was someone who turned such moments into opportunities. Heather's smirk suggested she believed the matter was settled, that Jasmine would meekly accept the humiliation and retreat into the lounge like so many others might have. But Heather didn't know Jasmine. She didn't know the fire that burned within her, the resolve that had carried her through far greater challenges than this. As Heather walked away, Jasmine's eyes followed her, a plan already forming in her mind. This was no longer just about her. It was about something bigger, about standing up to the microaggressions and prejudices that so many faced in silence. And Jasmine wasn't about to let it slide. In the quiet of the lounge, amidst the whispers and stares, Jasmine began making her move. Little did Heather know, in just a few minutes, her entire world was about to be turned upside down. Jasmine took a deep breath as Heather walked away, her red blazer swishing with the confidence of someone who believed they had just won a battle. But this wasn't over, not by a long shot. Jasmine's mind was already racing, calculating her next move. She wasn't the type to lash out in anger or create a scene, but she also wasn't the type to quietly accept being disrespected. Her success in life had come from her ability to navigate difficult situations with poise and precision, and this one would be no different. She glanced around the lounge, taking in the opulent surroundings. The leather chairs, the ambient lighting, the faint smell of freshly brewed coffee, it all exuded exclusivity. Yet, the people within it, the ones who stared at her as though she didn't belong, tainted the luxury with their quiet prejudice. Jasmine felt her phone buzz in her pocket. Pulling it out, she saw a message from her assistant reminding her about the upcoming summit. The message also included a detail that brought a small smile to her lips. The summit was being hosted by none other than the parent company of this very airline. This wasn't just a lounge. It wasn't just an insult. This was an opportunity. Jasmine walked over to one of the lounge's sleek coffee stations, where a barista stood ready to serve. She ordered a cappuccino, her voice calm and pleasant, even as her mind worked at lightning speed. As she waited, she opened her briefcase and pulled out her tablet. With a few taps, she was logged into her email, scrolling through her contacts. She quickly found the name she was looking for, Paul Hendricks, the CEO of the airline's parent company. Paul was someone she had met at a prior business summit. They weren't close, but they had shared a few conversations over cocktails, and he had expressed admiration for her work. It was enough of a connection to leverage. Her cappuccino arrived, and she took it with a gracious smile, walking to a quiet corner of the lounge where she could sit and think without interruption. She drafted a concise but pointed email, recounting her experience with Heather and the blatant disrespect she had endured. Jasmine wasn't the type to play the victim, but she also knew the power of calling out injustice when it was warranted. She framed the email carefully, emphasizing how this kind of behavior could tarnish the airline's reputation and alienate valuable customers. She also made it clear that she wasn't just any customer, she was someone with influence, someone who could bring attention to the issue if necessary. Satisfied with her message, she hit send. Then, she waited. The minutes ticked by slowly, the tension in the air almost palpable. Heather continued to patrol the lounge, her condescending smirk a constant reminder of the earlier exchange. Jasmine watched her out of the corner of her eye, noting how she interacted with other guests, polite, deferential, even friendly. The stark contrast only served to highlight the way Jasmine had been treated. Then, her phone buzzed. She glanced down and saw a response from Paul Hendricks himself. The subject line read, "Immediate action required." Jasmine opened the email, her heart pounding with a mix of anticipation and vindication. Paul's response was swift and direct. He apologized profusely for her experience, assuring her that this was not representative of the company's values. He thanked her for bringing it to his attention and promised that he would personally look into the matter. The email ended with a request for her phone number, as Paul wanted to discuss the situation further. Jasmine quickly typed out her number and hit send. Less than a minute later, her phone rang. She answered, keeping her voice steady and professional. "Jasmine, this is Paul Hendricks. I just read your email, and I have to say, I'm deeply disappointed by what you described. That is not how we conduct business, and it's certainly not how we treat our most valued customers." "Thank you for your quick response, Paul," Jasmine replied. "I appreciate you taking this seriously. My concern isn't just about what happened to me, it's about what this kind of behavior says about the company as a whole." "You're absolutely right," Paul said. "And I assure you, this will be addressed immediately. In fact, I'd like to make this right, not just for you, but for everyone who has ever experienced something similar. If you're open to it, I'd like to involve you in our diversity and inclusion initiatives. Your perspective would be invaluable." Jasmine smiled, appreciating the offer, but knowing that this was only the beginning. "I'd be happy to discuss that further, Paul. But first, I think it's important to address the immediate issue. Heather needs to understand that her behavior is unacceptable, and the staff here need better training to ensure this doesn't happen again." "Consider it done," Paul said firmly. "I'll be calling the lounge manager personally, and I'll make sure Heather is held accountable. In the meantime, please let me know if there's anything else I can do to make this right." "Thank you, Paul. I look forward to seeing how the company addresses this moving forward." They ended the call, and Jasmine felt a sense of satisfaction. But she wasn't done yet. She knew that real change required more than just a conversation, it required action. Moments later, the lounge manager approached her table. He was a middle-aged man with a kind demeanor, though his expression was laced with anxiety. Clearly, he had just received a call from someone very important. "Miss Carter," he began, his voice respectful, "I'd like to personally apologize for the way you were treated today. This is not the standard we uphold, and I am truly sorry for the disrespect you experienced." Jasmine nodded, her expression calm but firm. "Thank you for the apology. I hope this serves as a learning moment for your team." "It absolutely will," the manager assured her. "If there's anything I can do to make your time here more comfortable, please don't hesitate to ask." As the manager walked away, Jasmine noticed Heather standing at the counter, her face pale and her confident smirk replaced with a look of apprehension. Jasmine met her gaze, holding it for a moment before turning away. She didn't need to say anything, her actions had spoken louder than words. But Jasmine wasn't done yet. She decided to take things one step further. Pulling out her tablet again, she logged into her social media accounts and composed a post. She didn't name the airline or the staff involved, but she shared her experience in a way that was both personal and powerful. She framed it as a broader conversation about respect, inclusion, and the importance of standing up against subtle forms of discrimination. The post went live, and within minutes, the responses began pouring in. Messages of support, stories from others who had faced similar situations, and even apologies from strangers who felt compelled to acknowledge the injustice. Jasmine's story was striking a chord, and she knew that it would only grow from here. As she sipped her cappuccino, Jasmine felt a sense of calm wash over her. She had turned a moment of humiliation into an opportunity for change. She had taken a stand, not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been made to feel like they didn't belong. And this was only the beginning. Jasmine sat in the corner of the lounge, sipping her cappuccino as a quiet sense of triumph settled over her. The manager's apology had been genuine, and Heather's rattled expression was evidence enough that the message had hit its mark. But Jasmine knew this wasn't just about her. One individual being held accountable didn't change the culture or erase the subtle biases that had tainted her experience. She wasn't finished, not by a long shot. She glanced at her tablet, where her social media post was gaining traction. Notifications poured in as people from all walks of life shared her story, commenting on their own experiences of discrimination or applauding her courage for speaking out. Jasmine's phone buzzed again, and this time it was an email notification. She opened it to find another message from Paul Hendricks, the airline's CEO. Jasmine, the email began, I've spoken with the regional manager responsible for that lounge, and immediate action is being taken. However, I'd like to go a step further. I want to invite you to meet with our board of directors at your earliest convenience to discuss ways we can improve not only our policies but also our corporate culture. Your perspective would be invaluable. Jasmine raised an eyebrow, impressed by the swift escalation of the situation. It was rare for a CEO to take such a personal interest in a single customer's experience, but she knew this wasn't just about her individual case. Her story had become a symbol of a much larger issue, one that the airline couldn't afford to ignore. She replied to the email, agreeing to the meeting and suggesting a few dates that aligned with her busy schedule. Then, she leaned back in her chair, allowing herself a moment to reflect. It had been less than an hour since the incident with Heather, but already the ripple effects were spreading. Still, Jasmine wasn't someone who rested on her laurels. She wanted to ensure that this momentum translated into meaningful change. Her thoughts were interrupted by a commotion near the entrance of the lounge. She turned to see a man in a sharp business suit walking briskly toward her. He was accompanied by the lounge manager, who looked both nervous and relieved to have reinforcements. The man approached Jasmine's table with an outstretched hand and a warm smile. Miss Carter, I'm Richard Collins, the regional director for this airport's operations. I wanted to personally apologize for the experience you had earlier. It's unacceptable, and I assure you, we're taking this very seriously. Jasmine shook his hand, her expression polite but guarded. Thank you, Mr. Collins. I appreciate the apology, but as I mentioned to the lounge manager, an apology alone doesn't fix the underlying issues. Of course, Richard agreed quickly, taking a seat across from her. That's why I'd like to discuss how we can do better. We're implementing immediate training for our staff to address unconscious bias, and I'd like to hear your input on how we can make our lounges more welcoming and inclusive. Jasmine studied him for a moment, weighing his sincerity. She could tell he was genuinely trying to make things right, but she also knew that real change required more than good intentions. It required commitment, resources, and follow-through. I appreciate your willingness to address this, Mr. Collins, she said finally. But training is just the first step. If you really want to create a culture of inclusivity, you need to start at the top. That means diversifying your leadership team, reviewing your hiring practices, and creating accountability mechanisms to ensure these policies are enforced. Richard nodded, taking notes on a small tablet he had brought with him. You're absolutely right. And I'd like to invite you to be part of this process. Your insights and experiences could help us identify blind spots and create solutions that truly make a difference. Jasmine hesitated for a moment. She had a packed schedule, with multiple projects demanding her attention. But the opportunity to influence change at such a high level was too important to pass up. I'd be open to that, she said. But I want to be clear, this isn't just about me. This is about ensuring that no one else has to go through what I went through today. If I'm going to be involved, I need to see a genuine commitment from your company to address these issues. You have my word, Richard said firmly. We'll back this initiative with the full support of our leadership team. I'll personally ensure that you're kept in the loop every step of the way. Satisfied for now, Jasmine nodded. All right. Let's see where this goes. As Richard stood to leave, Jasmine couldn't help but notice Heather lingering near the counter, watching the exchange with a mixture of curiosity and unease. Jasmine met her gaze for a brief moment, then turned back to her tablet. She had bigger things to focus on. Over the next hour, Jasmine remained in the lounge, responding to emails and phone calls as the situation continued to evolve. Her social media post had gone viral, attracting attention from journalists, influencers, and advocacy groups. Several prominent figures in the business world reached out to express their support, and a few even shared their own stories of facing discrimination in professional settings. It was clear that Jasmine's experience had struck a nerve. By the time her flight was called, Jasmine felt a renewed sense of purpose. She boarded the plane with her head held high, determined to make the most of the platform she had been given. The incident in the lounge had been humiliating, but it had also opened doors she hadn't anticipated. When she arrived at her destination, a bustling city where the business summit was being held, Jasmine was greeted by her assistant, Chloe, who was already updated on the unfolding events. "Jasmine, your post is everywhere," Chloe said as they walked through the airport. "People are calling you a trailblazer. Even the summit organizers want you to address this in your keynote speech." Jasmine paused, considering the idea. Her keynote was supposed to focus on entrepreneurship and leadership, but this incident had highlighted a different kind of leadership, one that involved standing up for justice and creating opportunities for others. "Let's rewrite the speech," she said finally. "I want to talk about more than just business strategies. I want to talk about resilience, inclusion, and using your platform to create change." Chloe nodded, already typing notes into her tablet. "Got it. This is going to be powerful." The next day, Jasmine stood on the stage of a grand conference hall, addressing a packed audience of industry leaders, innovators, and aspiring entrepreneurs. She spoke with passion and authenticity, sharing her story and challenging her audience to think about their own roles in fostering inclusivity and breaking down barriers. Her words resonated deeply, earning her a standing ovation by the end of the speech. As she stepped off the stage, Jasmine felt a surge of pride. The events of the past 24 hours had been challenging, but they had also reaffirmed her belief in the power of speaking out and standing up for what was right. She had turned a moment of humiliation into a movement for change, and she knew that this was just the beginning. Back at her hotel room that evening, Jasmine received an email from Paul Hendricks. The airline's board of directors had approved a new diversity and inclusion initiative, and they wanted her to lead the advisory committee. Jasmine smiled as she read the message, knowing that her efforts were already making an impact. This wasn't just about a single incident in an airport lounge. It was about creating a ripple effect that would challenge norms, shift mindsets, and pave the way for a more inclusive future. And Jasmine Carter was ready to lead the charge. The days following Jasmine's keynote speech were a whirlwind of activity. Her story continued to gain traction, resonating with people from all walks of life. Media outlets picked up on the incident, and Jasmine found herself at the center of a growing conversation about systemic bias and the ways it manifested in professional and social spaces. It wasn't a role she had sought out, but it was one she felt uniquely prepared to handle. Returning home after the summit, Jasmine was greeted with a flood of messages, emails, and invitations. Advocacy groups wanted her to speak at their events, corporations were reaching out for consultations, and individuals were sharing their personal stories of discrimination and resilience. Jasmine read through as many of them as she could, struck by how deeply her experience had resonated. This wasn't just her story anymore, it was a collective narrative, one that represented countless others who had faced similar injustices but hadn't had the platform to speak out. One email, in particular, caught her attention. It was from a young woman named Maya, who worked as a flight attendant for the same airline that had been at the center of the incident. Maya's message was heartfelt and raw, detailing her own struggles with discrimination within the company. She described how she had been passed over for promotions, subjected to microaggressions from both colleagues and passengers, and how the company's so-called diversity initiatives often felt performative rather than impactful. "I saw your story and felt seen for the first time," Maya wrote. "I've wanted to speak out for years, but I've been too afraid of losing my job. Thank you for being brave enough to say what so many of us are thinking. If there's anything I can do to support your efforts, please let me know." Jasmine read Maya's email twice, her heart aching for the young woman. She knew how isolating it could feel to navigate spaces where you were constantly underestimated or overlooked. And she also knew that Maya's story was likely one of many within the airline and beyond. It was clear that the problem ran deeper than just one lounge or one staff member, it was systemic, embedded in the culture of the company itself. She decided to reply to Maya immediately, thanking her for sharing her story and assuring her that her voice mattered. Jasmine also invited Maya to join her on a call to discuss her experiences in more detail. If Jasmine was going to help drive meaningful change, she needed to understand the problem from all angles. A few days later, Jasmine and Maya connected over a video call. Maya was nervous at first, her voice shaky as she recounted her experiences. But as Jasmine listened with empathy and encouraged her to speak freely, Maya's confidence grew. She described instances where she had been assigned the least desirable shifts, excluded from important meetings, and even reprimanded for things her colleagues got away with. It was clear that the bias she faced was both pervasive and insidious. "What's most frustrating," Maya said, her voice tinged with frustration, "is that they always talk about how much they value diversity. They'll feature a photo of someone like me in their marketing materials, but behind the scenes, nothing really changes." Jasmine nodded, her mind already racing with ideas. "Maya, would you be willing to share your story, anonymously, if you prefer, with the airline's leadership team? I think it's important that they hear directly from their employees about what's really going on." Maya hesitated, fear flickering across her face. "I don't know. What if it backfires? What if they figure out it's me, and I lose my job?" "You wouldn't be alone," Jasmine assured her. "I'll be right there with you, and I'll make sure they understand that this isn't about singling out individuals, it's about addressing systemic issues. But I completely understand if you're not ready. The choice is yours." Maya took a deep breath, considering her options. Finally, she nodded. "I'll do it. But only if my name stays out of it." Jasmine smiled, grateful for Maya's bravery. "That's more than enough. Thank you, Maya. You're helping to pave the way for real change." With Maya's permission, Jasmine began compiling her testimony along with stories she had received from other employees and customers of the airline. She created a detailed report, highlighting specific examples of bias and discrimination and offering actionable recommendations for improvement. The report was thorough and uncompromising, designed not just to expose the problems but to provide a roadmap for solving them. Jasmine shared the report with Paul Hendricks and the airline's board of directors ahead of her scheduled meeting with them. When the day of the meeting arrived, she walked into the boardroom with her head held high, carrying herself with the same confidence she had shown in the airport lounge. The room was filled with executives, mostly men in suits, their expressions a mix of curiosity and defensiveness. Paul greeted her warmly, introducing her to the board members and thanking her for taking the time to meet with them. Jasmine took a seat at the head of the table, her report in front of her. She began by sharing her own experience in the lounge, recounting the incident with Heather and the impact it had on her as a customer and a professional. "This isn't just about one employee or one isolated incident," she said, her voice steady and commanding. "This is about a culture that allows bias to go unchecked, that prioritizes appearances over substance when it comes to diversity and inclusion. And it's not just customers who are affected, it's your employees as well." She went on to share Maya's testimony, careful to protect her anonymity, as well as the stories of others who had reached out to her. The room was silent as she spoke, the weight of her words sinking in. When she finished, she handed out copies of her report, walking the board through her recommendations. "These aren't just suggestions," Jasmine said, her tone firm. "They're necessary steps if you want to create a truly inclusive environment, one that doesn't just talk about valuing diversity but actually lives it." The board members asked questions, some of them skeptical, others genuinely engaged. Jasmine answered each one with poise, backing up her points with data and real-world examples. By the end of the meeting, it was clear that she had made an impression. Paul stood up, addressing the room. "Jasmine is right. We can't afford to ignore these issues. If we want to be a leader in our industry, we need to lead by example. I propose that we implement her recommendations immediately and bring her on as a consultant to oversee the process." The board members murmured among themselves, before nodding in agreement. Jasmine felt a sense of accomplishment but knew this was just the beginning. The real work was still ahead. As she left the meeting, Paul walked her to the elevator. "Thank you for everything, Jasmine," he said. You've opened our eyes to things we've been blind to for too long. I'm glad to help, Jasmine replied. But remember, this isn't about me, it's about creating a better future for everyone. As the elevator doors closed, Jasmine felt a surge of hope. Change was never easy, but it was always worth fighting for. And she was ready to fight. Jasmine's journey over the past weeks had been a whirlwind, but she wasn't someone who shied away from momentum. After her impactful meeting with the board of directors, the airline wasted no time in putting some of her recommendations into action. Paul Hendricks kept his word, appointing Jasmine as a special consultant to oversee their diversity and inclusion initiatives. Her role would be pivotal in reshaping the company's policies and culture, but she knew this wasn't just about implementing change, it was about ensuring it lasted. Her first task was to design a comprehensive training program that went beyond the usual surface-level seminars about unconscious bias. Jasmine had seen too many companies treat diversity training as a box to check, a formality rather than a meaningful step toward transformation. This time, she was determined to make it different. She partnered with a team of experts in organizational behavior, sociology, and cultural studies to craft a program that would challenge employees to examine their biases, question their assumptions, and understand the impact of their actions. The program, titled Empathy in Action, wasn't just for frontline employees. It was mandatory for everyone in the organization, from entry-level staff to senior executives. Jasmine insisted on this, knowing that real change had to start at the top. The sessions included immersive role-playing exercises, candid discussions about systemic inequities, and opportunities for employees to share their own stories. It wasn't comfortable or easy, but that was the point. Growth never came from comfort. Jasmine herself led the first session, standing in front of a group of regional managers, including Heather, who had been invited to participate as part of her own development plan. Heather's expression was reserved, a mix of discomfort and curiosity. Jasmine met her gaze, not with hostility, but with determination. This wasn't about retribution, it was about building bridges. Today, Jasmine began, her voice steady and resolute, we're going to talk about what it means to truly see each other. Not just as coworkers or customers, but as human beings with experiences, struggles, and dreams. The goal isn't to point fingers or assign blame. It's to understand. To empathize. And ultimately, to grow. The room was silent, the weight of her words settling over the group. Jasmine walked them through her own story, recounting the incident in the lounge with honesty and vulnerability. She spoke not just about the humiliation she had felt, but also about the deeper pain of knowing that such moments were far too common for people who looked like her. As she spoke, she noticed Heather's posture change. The defensiveness in her body language softened, replaced by something that looked almost like regret. When the session shifted to group discussions, Heather was one of the first to speak. I want to apologize, Heather said, her voice quieter than usual. Not just to you, Jasmine, but to everyone I may have treated unfairly. I realize now that I let my assumptions and biases guide my actions, and I'm deeply sorry. Jasmine nodded, appreciating the gesture, but knowing that words alone wouldn't suffice. Thank you for acknowledging that, Heather. What matters now is what you do next. Apologies are important, but change is what makes them meaningful. Heather nodded, her resolve evident. It was a small moment, but it felt significant. Jasmine knew that change wasn't about perfection, it was about progress. Over the next few months, the airline began to implement systemic changes that went far beyond training sessions. They revised their hiring practices to ensure more diverse representation at every level of the organization. They created mentorship programs to support employees from underrepresented backgrounds and established clear accountability measures to track progress and address disparities. Jasmine worked closely with the leadership team, guiding them through difficult conversations and helping them navigate the complexities of creating a truly inclusive culture. But her efforts weren't confined to the airline. Jasmine's story had sparked a larger movement, one that extended far beyond the confines of a single company. Advocacy groups, corporate leaders, and community organizations reached out to her, eager to collaborate and learn from her experience. Jasmine found herself in high demand, traveling across the country to speak at conferences, lead workshops, and consult with organizations looking to make meaningful change. One of the most rewarding moments came when Maya, the flight attendant who had initially reached out to Jasmine, contacted her again. This time, Maya's tone was different, hopeful, even excited. She shared how the changes within the airline were already making a difference, how employees were starting to feel seen and valued in ways they hadn't before. "They even promoted me," Maya said, her voice tinged with disbelief. "I'm a supervisor now. And it's not just about the title, it's about what it represents. For the first time, I feel like I actually belong." Jasmine felt a surge of pride as she listened to Maya's story. It was moments like this that reminded her why she had taken on this fight in the first place. Change was never easy, but it was always worth it. As Jasmine's influence grew, so did her vision. She founded an organization called Bridge Builders, dedicated to fostering inclusion and equity across industries. The organization offered consulting services, training programs, and resources for companies looking to create more inclusive environments. It also provided scholarships and mentorship opportunities for young professionals from marginalized communities, ensuring that the next generation would have the support they needed to succeed. Through Bridge Builders, Jasmine connected with countless individuals and organizations, each contributing to the larger mission of creating a more just and equitable world. She often reflected on how her journey had started, not with a grand plan, but with a single moment of humiliation in an airport lounge. What had initially felt like an isolating experience had become a catalyst for change, proving that even the most challenging moments could lead to something greater. One day, Jasmine received a letter from Paul Hendricks. It was handwritten, a rarity in the age of emails and text messages. In it, he thanked her for her unwavering dedication and acknowledged the profound impact she had made, not just on the airline, but on the industry as a whole. "Your courage and leadership have inspired us all," he wrote. "Because of you, we are not just a better company, we are better people. Thank you for reminding us of the power of empathy, the importance of accountability, and the value of seeing each other as equals." Jasmine read the letter with a smile, feeling a sense of fulfillment that words couldn't fully capture. She had turned a moment of adversity into a movement for change, proving that even the smallest acts of courage could ripple outward in ways that were both unexpected and transformative. As she looked out the window of her office, the city skyline stretching out before her, Jasmine felt a deep sense of gratitude. The journey had been anything but easy, but it had been worth every step. She knew there was still much work to be done, but she also knew she wasn't alone. Together, with allies like Maya, Paul, and countless others who believed in the power of change, she was building something lasting, something that would continue to make an impact long after her story was told. And in that moment, Jasmine felt a quiet, profound truth settle over her: this was just the beginning.